The contentious issue of guns and gun crime in our country is being discussed once again here in Alberta. To talk more about it is our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, also the Alberta correspondent with the National Post. Tyler, the province made a recent announcement regarding guns and protecting the rights of gun owners. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So when the federal government first made its announcement about gun control, which banned sort of large swaths of classes of what the government was calling assault style firearms, Jason Kenney had come out against that sort of rather strongly, saying it was an attack on law-abiding gun owners. So on Wednesday, what happened was they announced an advisory panel that's going to sort of receive Albertans' concerns and look at the federal gun control measures for an eye a little bit to see what Alberta can do. Now, the Premier was asked, for example, whether or not there would be lawsuits from the province against the federal government, and he sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit on that, saying that it might actually be individual gun owners that have some more legal standing to make that case. So there's this advisory panel, we get another of the UCP committees that we've all come to know and love that's going to look into this issue. At the same time, they also announced that there was going to be the creation of a provincial forensic examination lab that would allow for more homegrown testing on firearms seized from use in crimes. So at the moment, that testing, there's some capacity for testing in Calgary, but lots of it is done elsewhere. And so there's quite a long delay. And as we've discussed before, there's this legal issue where if you're accused of a crime, you have to get to court in a certain period of time under a principle called Jordan, a Supreme Court ruling. So what this is hoping to do is to speed up some of these examinations, speed up some of this testing, speed up some of the court cases, so that we don't have people having their cases tossed out of court because of delays. So handful of different things coming here, but the examination is probably the big concrete proposal, and then this Firearms Advisory Council is going to report back on what could be done in the province at a later date.
Government officials also discuss vaping and smoking and the fact that the sale of vaping products to youth has been banned. Now, there are also some advertising restrictions set in place now.
Yeah, that's right. So basically what has happened or will be happening as a result of UCP legislation is vaping products are going to be treated much more closely to tobacco products than they have been in the province. So as you mentioned, sales will be restricted to people 18 years and older, as with tobacco products, but you will no longer, once this becomes law, see the displays that have vaping products in them, advertisements and things like that. Now, the other thing that is of note in these changes is that you're also not going to be able to vape in areas where you maybe could now. So, hospital grounds, school, childcare center grounds, you won't be able to, be blowing big plumes of vapor at the playground and things like that. So these changes sort of bring Alberta in line with other jurisdictions. They have been a long time coming. This was a budget promise for sure. May have even gone back to the party's campaign platform, but I can't quite remember, I should say. At any rate, yet another example of one of the things we've talked about a few times, which is the UCP, continuing with its legislative agenda during the pandemic, which I find quite interesting. Getting some governance decisions in addition to the COVID-19 responses.
COVID-19 forced the cancellation of many festivals across Canada, including Whoop Up Days here in Lethbridge and the world-famous Calgary Stampede. When I grew up in Calgary, we called it the greatest outdoor show on earth. Tyler, there's a bit of debate going on regarding rodeos. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So, I was going to say older viewers, but it's not really that long ago. In 2008, the Alberta Legislature actually debated whether or not rodeo should be the province's official sport. Now, this week there was a motion that was debated before the legislature where legislators were standing up and talking about the cultural importance of rodeo in Alberta. So, nothing came of it in the sense that rodeos are reopening or big piles of money going anywhere. But as you mentioned, big community events on hold this summer, and rodeo obviously being a huge one in especially smaller communities, but certainly in Calgary. And this was just sort of a recognition, I guess, of the cultural importance of those festivities.
Now let's discuss the Choice in Education Act, which allows for the minister to approve charter schools without consulting school boards. It also approves what? Homeschooling unsupervised and affirms supports for charter schools?
Yeah, that's right. So this has been a sticky issue at the legislature the last few days, little while here, I should say. Basically, what it does is now the government would say that it streamlines charter school applications. Previously, charter schools had to go to the public school board and explain how their school was going to offer a service, offer education that was different from what the public school system was offering. Now, what this does now is the education minister will, as you said, be able to approve it, and this, the government says, will sort of streamline the process. Now, of course, the New Democrats and other critics saying that this is, opening the door to privatizing schools, and they're sort of making hay on that, saying, we'll defund public schools for charter schools, all this kind of stuff. Now, on the homeschooling front, it's been described as unsupervised. Basically what it does is it reduces the number of times that a parent has to check in on following curriculum. So whether that's a hugely substantive change for parents who homeschool, I'm actually not totally sure. But again, these things are being sort of seized on by critics, and there was a big controversy this week where Gil McGowan, the president of the Alberta Federation of Labor, said this was, going to be for nut bar religious schools and things like that. Now the UCP is calling in the legislature for the NDP to apologize for it. The NDP is asking them to apologize for, taking money from public schools. So, if there's been fires instead of this week down at the legislature, it probably would be on that one in question period. Lots of back and forth and grumpy language being used, shall we say.
Now, part of the UCP election strategy was to tackle rural crime. Now, Tana, as part of the parole board legislation, it would only affect provincial jails?
Yeah, that's right. So the province basically has jurisdiction over provincial corrections institutions, which hold people who've been sentenced to 2 years or less. It's the specifics is like 2 years less a day, I think, or something like that. Now, the most serious crimes are handled federally. As it stands at the moment, Alberta parole decisions for these provincial institutions have been contracted out to the Parole Board of Canada. There are other provinces that have their own parole boards, namely Ontario and Quebec. So yes, as you mentioned, this is the government has sort of long characterized the Canadian justice system as being sort of a revolving door justice system and similar terms like that. So they want to have more control over people being granted parole for these 2 years and less crimes. And as you also mentioned, this is part of the rural crime strategy, the idea that you have people who are preying on people in rural areas, going into jail, being out, quickly, and then going back to commit more crimes. So it's very much a sort of part of their what I think would be fairly characterized as a tough on crime approach on this specific issue. But how many people that will affect and the seriousness of crimes that this will affect decisions on, those are in large part out of the provincial government's hands, I should say.
Tyler, some good news for people who live in trailer parks. Mobile home tenants now have access to tenancy dispute services.
Yeah, this is another one of those things that has sort of been slowly going along in the background. The UCP sort of announced an overhaul generally of tenancy disputes. And for whatever reason, I find it very baffling. Mobile home tenants were sort of excluded from some of these dispute resolution processes. That's now changed. So that's now in effect, I believe, as of June 1st. So if you're a mobile home resident, tenant, renter who has a dispute, you now do have access to those services where you wouldn't have before for some strange reason.
Now, as part of Alberta's relaunch strategy, fast food restaurants will be giving out 4 packs of masks at the drive-through. So instead of would you like fries with that, would you like a mask with that, right?
Exactly. I think I'd go for the fries and the mask myself, but that it should be mentioned that there is no purchase necessary to get these masks. The basic idea is that a vast majority of Albertans live within sort of driving distance of an A&W, a Tim Hortons, or a McDonald's, and so the province has partnered with those drive-throughs to hand out the masks, sort of a one per person kind of thing. I believe four masks at a time maybe is the limit. So yeah, the idea is, how can the government get non-medical masks into people's hands in the most efficient way possible? Now, obviously, a few logistical problems there, because first of all, you can't walk or ride your bike through a drive-through. So people who don't have vehicles are a little bit left out here, but the government basically argues that this is the simplest, the fastest, the most efficient way to get these masks out in the public. And as you mentioned off the top, this is very much part of the relaunch strategy. They want people wearing masks. They want the number of infections to continue to go down, and they see mask wearing in public as very much an integral part of this.
The Auditor General is going to review the government's response to COVID-19, Tyler. Now, we're talking big money in fighting this virus, so I guess it kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It hadn't even occurred to me until I realized it was happening. But the gist of it is that there is tons of money being spent. There's been columnists and pundits saying at the federal level that this has been sort of a reworking of the Canadian order in a way on a magnitude that hasn't happened since the Great Depression. And there's been sort of echoes of that here. You've heard Premier Kenney talk about how this is the biggest economic slump since the Great Depression, that there have been huge changes to government programs, government spending, and all that sort of stuff. So the Auditor General is basically going to be looking at all of this to see whether or not it's being administered efficiently, whether or not there's going to be bang for our buck, things like that. All the stuff that you would, maybe see the Auditor General look at, in normal terms, but now taking a look at it in these exceptional times. So I believe the report on that is expected back in the fall. So by then we should have, at least from the Auditor General, a pretty clear idea of how effectively Albertans' money was spent in the response to the pandemic.
As the return to normalcy is underway, the Fair Deal panel findings will be out in a couple of weeks, and the public health emergency is set to expire on June 15th. Can it possibly be extended?
Well, it certainly could, yeah. Other jurisdictions have extended theirs. I believe Ontario extended theirs in just a couple days ago, I should say. So Alberta could extend it. We'll have to see. I mean, the hint so far, it seems, is that there hasn't been a major spike in new cases since the reopening began. So that's certainly promising. As you mentioned, other sort of things happening, and the financial update should come. There have been calls in a few jurisdictions, including Alberta, that there should have been a new budget in the wake of the pandemic. If we cast our minds back, 12 weeks feels like a lifetime ago. The provincial budget was released here only, days before the pandemic hit and things started to go sideways. So there have been calls for a sort of robust and transparent look at the province's finances, and certainly a financial update of some sort will be better than nothing on that front for sure.
Let me ask you something. Some of the MLAs you've spoken with in Edmonton and surrounding area, many pastors I've spoken with in southwestern Alberta here are quite upset with the fact that they can only have 50 congregants in their churches right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, while restaurants up to 150 people. So they're like, how is this really fair? What are you hearing in Edmonton there?
Yeah, it's the biggest place actually that this has been an issue has been Ontario, where it's still only 5 people in Ontario, with the exception of drive-ins. And certainly those are concerns. The government has been, I would say, more forward on houses of worship and worship services than other jurisdictions, actually. When they came out with the relaunch documents, there was, specific documents for religious services, whereas it's a bit like pulling teeth to find some of this information in other jurisdictions. I was working on it the other day because it was a really significant Orthodox Jewish holiday on last Friday, and they couldn't gather in the way that they would have liked because of this 5-person limit. I guess maybe people can move their services outdoors if it's really nice and up those numbers. But certainly I sympathize with those people. There's some big congregations in this province that are in a tough way on that right now.
Well, I know the Springs Church in Winnipeg and some other places in Manitoba are doing drive-in movie theaters, right? Having the pastor speak right there on the big screen and larger than life. So
yeah,
you got to be creative, I guess, when it comes to places of worship.
Isn't that the truth?
Our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.